Yeah, so this is the tiny couch. Uh, Welcome to the green room because Tim Ross is doing the basement. We are in a basement, not the basement. So we'll call this the green room, I guess. Yeah, so welcome to the green room. Okay, yeah, so givers, takers, and waiters. I think givers, takers, and waiters comes from this idea of like, where do you fall into what God has given you and what He's called you to do with it? So are you the one who takes what God's given to you and passes it on, gives it? Or are you a person who kind of just takes what God gives him and just takes it, uses it for their own development, and uses it for their own kind of glory? Or are you someone who like knows what God has given you, but then you just sit back and you're wondering, yeah, I can wait on this. I know what God's calling me to do, but I'm in a position right now where it's more comfortable for me to wait. So yeah, the 1 week sermon is going to be on givers, takers, and waiters, and figuring out which one of you are. And surprise, surprise, the only correct answer is truly to be a giver, right? Because God has entrusted us with so much, but we can't just sit idly and use what God has given us for our own glory. But with that being said, I think there's a lot of different ways to use the giftings and callings that God has given you, but it's also very difficult to just sit back and say, this is what God has called me to do, and then act upon it, right? So first you got to figure out what God has called you to do, right? Which is not easy for most. It's not easy for me. I don't think it's easy for anyone actually. But once you have that feeling in your heart, that feeling that you know that God is calling you to do this and you can't stop. Like for me, it's been working with Revive, right? There's been, definitely some tough times, some hard, difficult seasons. But as I've matured and as we've grown and as time has gone on, I've realized that like in reality, there's nothing else that I would rather be doing right now. I'm young enough to, take this risk and just invest into this as much as I can. And I think that's what God is calling me to do right now. So that's why I'm here. And that's why all of this is happening. I don't know if anyone's going to watch this or if anyone's going to learn anything from this, but I honestly just want to provide some useful insight on, kind of building God's kingdom and then actually applying what the Bible teaches us. So givers, takers, and waiters kind of comes down from this idea found in Corinthians, where Paul is talking, he says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth, right? And so in one way, what he's talking about is, building the church, which was in Corinth. He's talking about the fact that, he started this. He was there at the very beginning. He laid that foundation, right? And then after he left, Apollos came and kind of watered what, was planted. But at the end of the day, the church in Corinth was saying stuff like, oh, I'm a disciple of Paul, or I'm a disciple of Apollos, which Paul was just like, hold up, whoa. That is incorrect, right? We're all followers of Jesus. We're not followers of Paul and Apollos. And so he comes back to he writes to the Corinthian church and he says, like, hey, the one who waters and the one who plants are both nothing because God is the one who gave the growth. And it was such an interesting concept for me because, you see all of these like mega church pastors and all these people like, man, what are they doing right? What are they doing in such a way that they can have such a massive impact in their communities and in the world? And one of the things that you have to realize is that, in fact, the only thing that they're really doing is providing the right conditions for the growth because God gives the growth, right? So I want to take you back to like 5th grade science class. Back in the day, I was in like 5th grade probably, and we had to grow this like clover, right? Sadly, the one that I had only grew 3 leaves. I was really hoping for 4. But God did not provide that growth for that extra leaf, and I was just distraught. But at the end of the day, we took these cups, right? We filled them up with dirt, put some water in them, we put the seed, watered it, gave it enough sunlight, and it grew. But if we really look back at it and say, were we the ones that caused that plant to grow? Were we the ones that gave that plant growth? I don't think so. I don't think so at all, because What we merely did was we provided the right conditions for it to grow, right? So you put the plant in dirt that was fertile and it had enough nutrients for it to survive. You watered it because the plant needed water to survive, right? And then you gave it sunlight for it to grow as well. But at the end of the day, you just provided the right conditions for that plant to grow, right? Because the plant grew because of the miracle of life, right? Back when God designed the whole universe, he planned for plants to grow in this certain environment, right? And the only way that the plants are going to grow is if all those conditions are met. So to say if you plant and you water it, to say that you gave it the growth is untrue, right? Because only God can give the growth through the miracle of life, which he planned way back when he created the universe. So it's all a very large picture that comes into view, especially when working within a church or finding your gifting, right? So one of the things that I like to think about was if you look down a little lower in the verses, Paul says that each one will be rewarded according to his labor. He's talking about the planter and the water and the person who waters, right? So for you to say that, like, okay, God, I've been doing everything right. I've been working so hard on this and I've been trying to, make this thing grow. And I know that you've called me to plant, right? I'm here planting the seeds. I'm doing what you've called me to do, but it's not growing. Now that might just be because the person who's called to water isn't doing his full responsibility, right? So if the person who plants, God gives him 4 seeds, right? He plants 4 seeds, okay? And if the person who waters, he's given enough water to water 4 seeds, but he only waters half of them and he's waiting for the other half. He's just like, there's another time. I'll be more comfortable in the future and I'll be able to, finish watering. The only thing about waiting is the fact that we don't know when God's going to come back, when Jesus is going to come back, right? So when the trumpet blows and we don't know that time and you're caught with only half of the waters or half of the plants watered, then what are you going to say? Right? Only half of the things that you were told to do, you've done. Now, God is still going to reward you, right? Because everyone's going to be rewarded based on his labors. But the person who planted and was faithful in doing all 4 plants, as God called him to do, is going to have a bigger reward in heaven than the person who only watered half, right? Because everyone will be rewarded based on their labors. Now, just like a side note, we're not talking about salvation here, right? Salvation is a gift that we can never earn and we don't deserve, right? So even if we lived perfect lives or if we tried to live perfect lives, we would never earn the gift of salvation. That was something that God gave us on the cross through the blood of his son so that we can one day reach heaven and be reunited with him, right? Now, as for the rewards and the gifts and all of that, it's going to be one of those things where this is all stuff that we're going to be given in heaven, right? So everyone's going to be rewarded based on their works on earth. They're going to be rewarded in heaven, right? So if you, I don't know, if you have been given gifts, right? And you kind of know, now, obviously you need to know that you've been given those gifts and you need to discover that. But I think it's our duty to look into the gifts that God has given us, because I think everybody has a gift given from God, right? I think every single person has been given a gift. And now it's up to them whether or not they're going to act in it and use it for the glory of God, or whether or not they're going to use it for their own glory, or either that, or they're just going to wait, right? So it comes back down to the three ideas of givers, takers, and waiters. Is one is the giver who has been given everything by capital G giver, God, right? He's been given everything and he gives it back to God. 2 is the waiter, right? The person who has been given everything by God. They kind of realize that they've been given everything by God, but they aren't really comfortable enough to walk in their calling just yet. And they're like, there's time. But in reality, there's no time. I mean, we don't know. It could be today, tomorrow. It could be it can't be yesterday. It could be today, tomorrow, in a month, in a year, 10 years, 100 years. Who knows, right? Because the Son of Man is going to return on a time where nobody knows. So there's the giver, and then there's the taker, or there's the waiter, and then there's just the taker. And those are the people who use their gifts for their own reward and their own glory on earth, right? And so that's a very difficult, path to follow. I mean, especially as Christians, because, if we're called to live like Jesus, he was always the giver, right? He took these 12 disciples, these 12 random dudes who were definitely a little rough around the edges, and he took them and transformed them. He connected them to himself, to Jesus, right? Through God, to God. And he changed their lives. He transformed them. And then he empowered them to go out into the world and become fishers of men. And like today, like where we are at today is all due to one man named Jesus, who was also fully God, who came to this earth and took 12 people, changed their lives completely. I mean, transformed their lives and empowered them to keep this thing going. Now, granted, yeah, the miracles and all of that did help spread the word, and but I think ultimately, if Jesus came as someone who wasn't a giver, perhaps someone who was a taker or just a waiter, right? And he came to this earth and was completely unaware, or rather ignorant of what God had called him to do, we would not be here today. Like, we would not be in the situation we are today. Like, we would be completely, I don't even know if, like, honestly, I feel like God would have just destroyed the earth, right? Now we're just talking about crazy stuff here, but the fact that Jesus gave everything he had for us, being fully man and fully God, right? He gave everything for us so that we can live one day in heaven with God. Just shows like the importance of humility and the importance of doing what God has called you to do over, using it for your own gain. Because he could have came down from heaven with, chariots of fire, right? And just been like, oh, I am the Son of God. I'm here to rule the earth. And this is what kind of like the Jews were expecting, right? When they were expecting the Son of God to come down, they were like, oh, he's going to be a king. He's going to be mighty. He's going to be, right? And this man came and was born in a manger, right? So to them, it's like, oh, this is nonsense, right? Because in their mind, someone who has all this authority of being God and man is going to come down and just take everything, right? They're going to take everything. They're going to rule and be this awesome, mighty power. But at the end of the day, Jesus came down to model humility and servanthood, right? And through that, I think it really paints an awesome picture of the love of God, right? Because God loved us so much that he gave his only son, his one and only son, that we may not perish but have eternal life. Right. And to think about that is crazy. I mean, if you take 10, I heard this thing about Francis Chan. He said that if you take 10, 15 seconds to think about who you're praying to before you pray, right? It's going to change the way you pray. But I want you to take this a step further, right? To think about this, if you take even 2 minutes before you start studying the Bible, or before you think about this idea that Jesus came to this earth to save us, if you take like 2 minutes to think about the implications of what that meant, right? This awesome, all-powerful God, right? He takes his only son, perfect, and he gives it to us as a sacrifice so that we can be this. It just speaks of the love of God so immensely, and it's really difficult to like comprehend this. So I really encourage you to just take a few minutes and just think about who God is, right? The creator of the universe. Just look outside the window. Like, it's insane. Like, go for a walk in the forest and you'll see like, wow, like everything is to this like perfect design, right? And it's a shame that like as humans, we have gotten so used to, you go walk outside and go to the forest or walk to the park. And you're just like, yeah, wow, it's nice outside. But like, if you stop and just look for a few seconds, like the details on the leaves and the details in the sky, right? You have to like, I mean, even as someone who's, and not a Christian, you have to stop and think and look and be like, wow, the chances of this being completely random and the chances of this just happening are zero, right? And I think that's one of the testaments of, you know, God's grace and his love for us, is that he portrayed himself in the splendor of this earth. And we've learned to take it to granted a lot of times. Like, I saw this stick bug, not a stick bug. It was like a grasshopper. And it was a big boy. It was about this big. And he flew into my house. But I kind of like brushed it off at first. I was like, oh, ew, a bug in the house. And I was like getting ready to get rid of it. And then I looked at it a little more closely, and like, the fact that this bug looked so much like a leaf. I mean, like, it had the veins of the leaves. It had the brown parts around the sides, that like the burnt parts of the leaf, the parts that were like kind of rotting, or I don't know what the proper word is for that. But the fact that this bug, this little insignificant thing that just hops around in the grass, right, looks so much like a leaf and is designed in such a way to survive and be just a testament of, I mean, God's grace, right? Ultimately, if you look at nature, if you look at everything that we've been given, all the abilities and all the awesome things that we get to do, like, I think it's really difficult to come to the conclusion that there's no God, if not impossible, right? And I don't know where this is even coming from or where this is going, but like, ultimately, the three main ideas of this coming up sermon is about givers, takers, and waiters, right? And which part of that spectrum do we fall under?